Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start. May I have your attention? Thank you. State Secretary Dr. Raed Arafat, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mrs. Mami Mizutori, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, present in the room, but also joining us online today. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this action-oriented dialogue, understanding and communicating existing and future risks, ensuring evidence-based communication. We know that accurate and timely risk information can save lives. Yet, as recent crises have shown, ensuring this information, this critical information, reaches the last mile and is acted upon presents many challenges. We have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic how mis- and disinformation in a fast-evolving technological landscape can undermine public trust and the global health response. But we have also learned a lot from these difficult times. And today we will hear good practices and initiatives from around the region, and we will focus and reflect on lessons learned and how we put them in practice moving forward to build public trust and ensure that risk communication is grounded in science. We have a packed agenda today with 2 technical sessions. Our session this morning will focus on building trust through effective risk communication. And this afternoon, the discussion will center around using science to inform risk communication. And we will conclude the day with a Youth Disaster Risk Reduction Advocates Roundtable. The recommendations from these sessions will be presented to the high-level roundtable tomorrow and reflected in the outcome document. Allow me now to introduce our panelists for this morning. We will first hear opening remarks from Dr. Raed Arafat, Secretary of State, Ministry of Interior of Romania, and Head of the Department for Emergency Situations. We will then hear a keynote speech by Cristiana Salvi, who leads the risk communication and community engagement in the World Health Organization Regional Office for Europe. Our other panelists this morning will be Adrienne Tudose, Director at the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center for the Cooperation Department, Miguel Arriaga, Head of the Division of Literacy, Health and Well-being at the Ministry of Health of Portugal, Lisa Robinson, Senior Advisor at BBC Media Action, Minna Armanen, Senior Advisor at the National Agency for Education in Finland, and Anna Sadan-Sevaite, United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth Representative. We will conclude the panel with a question and answer session, and I invite you to submit your question on Slido during the panelist interventions. So to ask a question, you can go on Slido, sli.do, and enter the code. I think it will be shown on screen, but the code is 9558416. And I think we should also have a QR code if we can put the slide on the screen. So don't hesitate to send in your questions throughout the panelist interventions. But we will now begin with opening remarks from Dr. Raed Arafat, who is the founder of the Mobile Emergency Service for Resuscitation and Extrication, and he has coordinated structures and strategic programs for emergency situations. So without further ado, I give you the floor.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So we want to talk about how to build trust. Let's see the environment we are living in, at least some of us, and I can speak on our experience that we had during the pandemic, but not only. Because when I talked the first time about this issue during a meeting led by Her Excellency Mrs. Mizutori. The pandemic was not yet here, and I was shouting there is a problem in communicating risk, because the environment we are living in, it doesn't allow us to communicate efficiently and easily with the population and with the individuals. If you do something good by the authorities, the chance that this will be reflected by the media are very low. Because the media goes on the rule, good news is no news, and if a dog bites a man, it's no news, but if the man bites the dog, then this is news. And then if you try to reflect to the population what you are doing to gain their trust, it becomes harder. Then during crisis, a lot of interests converge. The authorities want to deal with the crisis and do something, and I don't know authorities that want to harm their population. Authorities, usually, they want to do something to tackle the crisis. Yes, there may be deficiencies, maybe some things had to be done before they were not done and so on, and there are responsibilities. But still, during the crisis, we want to communicate to our population. But this is when everybody puts all the guns on the authorities when they are dealing with the crisis, and they try even to drop more the confidence in the state authorities that are doing the response. And it doesn't stop at the political level, it goes to the institutions and so on. And there are many actors who are interested in dropping the confidence in the institutions. There are external actors, there are even internal actors who are interested in not having high level of confidence in the institutions. Some of the countries represented here succeeded to do a lot about this, and others we are just learning how to do it. We need to communicate efficiently with the individual. We need to pass messages to the individual. And we need to show every citizen what we are doing and to bring them together with us to join us in preparing themselves for risks and for disasters. And for this, it means that we need to create tools, and we need to be always present. If we communicate on crisis management and on disaster management only during the disaster, then the communication will fail. If we communicate all the time, continuously, about the risks and about what the population may expect, then we may have the success to make the population have confidence in us, because they will have heard what we were saying about a disaster when it happens. They will say, yes, they were telling us something. They told us, they were transparent with us. A few years ago, we were not daring talking about earthquakes except on one day in the year. That's the 4th of March, to commemorate the earthquake in 1977 in Romania. And then it was silencio stampa, as we say. No one was allowed to say anything, because whenever you say anything, there were people saying, you are inducing panic in the population. You should not talk about this. So I remember in 2015, when together with the General Inspectorate for Emergency Situations, we created 7 short videos, and we said, we will show this to the population, how to prepare yourself before, how to behave during an earthquake, how to behave after that. And I remember that the minister at that time, he called me and, hey, are you crazy? You are going to induce panic in the population. And I said, no, we will go with it, because this is a new paradigm. We have to talk about risks. After 2 days, everybody was happy with them, and nobody was panicking, and people started talking about it. So suggesting or saying from the beginning that we should not communicate because we will induce panic, and then to go and try to communicate what you have done during the disaster itself, it's a failure. So this means that communicating risk is a continuous issue, and it has to happen from the beginning, all the time, and we have to find moments where to do the communication when we don't have the disasters. And now, for example, Romania, for the first time, we used to celebrate our National Civil Protection Day on the 28th of February and the International Civil Protection Day on the 1st of March every year, but now we said no, we will celebrate a week. So we will be celebrating the week of civil protection, And all over the country, we will be talking about risks, hazards, everything to the population openly. We will have people going to schools. We will have open actions. We will open the doors of all the fire stations. We will involve the medical personnel in first aid training for the whole week all over the country. And this will generate more and more discussions. And during the year, we have our caravans going to the rural areas where we have less access through social media and so on. And they go and they spend Saturday, Sunday in smaller towns and so on, talking to the people, training them, explaining to them. One more thing we are doing, together with the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, which is a recent institution of research in Romania, we are launching during the week the brochure of the civil protection. And you have heard the Prime Minister when he said that we gave a government decision yesterday that every site must have a link to the Be Prepared platform we have in Romania. But also we are thinking of sending it on printed materials to the rural areas where we expect that they will have less access to internet and so on. So this is how we are trying to build up risk, showing what we are doing, talking about what we are doing, showing people every time we buy equipment, we have an event showing what we bought. And I heard someone telling us, you are showing off. No, we are not showing off. We are building trust. We are showing the people that we are using EU funds and government funds to build up our civil protection. This is building up trust. We don't have to hide these things. We have to show them. If they see them, they believe more that we are doing something. So I think that these are small ways of doing this. And the last thing, when you are in Romania, you can download an app that we have, DSU, and you will see in that app, you can go in without authentication. You will see in that app, we give alerts, we give information, there is educational information reflected also from the Be Prepared platform. And this is a way also to keep in touch with the population. And there is a section on news on emergency services. And there we post news about what is happening, about rescuing lives, saving lives, so that people know that we are working all the time, that our agencies are working all the time. I will stop here. Thank you. And of course, we will have questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Arafat. I will now give the floor to Cristina Salvi, who leads the risk communication and community engagement in the World Health Organization Regional Office for Europe. She has been deployed in health emergency settings for the 20 years across the globe and is now leading the response on risk communication and community engagement in 4 major emergencies in the European region, which is unprecedented. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Fanny, and Secretary Dr. Arafat. Thank you so much for the invitation, and also to EFDRR for this incredible opportunity that I'm having today. It's an honor, but it's also a dream for me, because I've been working in the area of risk communication for the past 20 years. And a conference of this level and with this engagement on the theme of risk communication is again a dream come true. Having worked on that all my life. I will start with a quote of the WHO Director General. You might remember the special session of the World Health Assembly in December 2021 on COVID. And what he said is, I call on all member states to intensify and target risk communication, strengthen community engagement, empowerment and support, addressing community concerns, combating misinformation, and building trust. What is happening in this room, in this beautiful room today and tomorrow, which is led by the government of Romania and EFDRR, is a concrete response to this call. So thank you very much for this. And in this quote, risk communication, community engagement, and infodemic management come together. And this is intentional. Because under the international regulation, some of you might know the IHR, what we call the IHR, which is a global treaty requiring all countries to build capacities for all hazard emergencies. In the past, there was also only risk communication. But at this time, there is a revision of the monitoring mechanism of the international air regulation, where risk communication, community engagement come together as one capacity. And this is a clear signal for all the countries that the communities are central to emergency response. Infodemic management, which is addressing rumors, misinformation, and disinformation, is also an integral part of what we call RCCE, Risk Communication Community Engagement. But just let's look a minute of what is the role of RCCE in emergency response. Experience has shown that delivering services and intervention to people alone is not enough. People behavior is central to emergency control, and to accelerate recovery, we need that people accept and access these services and intervention. In a nutshell, RCCE, Risk Communication Community Engagement, bridges service delivery and access. So let's take, for instance, the COVID-19 pandemic that we all know. We can provide high-quality testing. We can provide contact tracing tools, isolation facilities. We can offer vaccine, treatment, but unless people accept and access them, all is useless. So you see that the support from the public is crucial to the emergency response, and this is what RCCE enables. This is what it does. So let's look at how we can gain that support. In October last year, my office has published a compendium of case studies, which is basically the result of a dozen of interviews with RCCE practitioners from a large variety of stakeholders, and basically draws the lessons from the COVID pandemic. And we try with that to document the RCCE response and to provide evidence to policymaking. So there are 10 lessons, and of course this document is available for everybody, and these 10 lessons can be condensed in 3 main areas that I will go through. First of all, RCCE is a public health intervention. So this is not an add-on to the response, but is a highly skilled area, evidence-based, that requires dedicated staff. And it also needs that RCCE systems are embedded in emergency decision-making, and the capacity is built, advanced, and sustained at every step of the emergency cycle. The second, and we have heard that already, RCCE leads to trust. Is the contract of trust between the people and the health authorities that drives the acceptance and uptake of protective measures. And at the end, it saves the lives. In essence, how does it do it? RCCE feeds trust by communicating early and transparently, dispelling rumors and misinformation, acknowledging the uncertainty of the response, which is very critical, particularly in disease outbreaks, by ensuring the consistency through coordination, and by grounding the messages into people's perceptions and needs. This is not a new lesson, but we can say that the pandemic and other recent emergencies have brought it to the forefront. The third element is that communities are at the heart of emergency response. Communities are there at the first to tackle an emergency before national government and international partners can come in. So it is critical to partner with them and to co-design the intervention. And this partnership with community actors and influencers created a bridge between authorities and between citizens. And it actually feeds the trust in a very strong way and the support to the emergency. There are some aspects of these lessons that I would like to zoom in, each for a reason. One is infodemic management, that is so close to Dr. Rafat Red-Hart. This is the emerging skill that we all need. We have been talking about this. The COVID pandemic has produced conditions akin to a perfect storm of conspiracy theory, and misinformation, both online and offline. And these have consistently eroded the trust, undermined health choices, and put life at risk. We know of 1,000 deaths, unnecessary deaths of people who refused the COVID vaccine. And this is evidence that misinformation is lethal. And we are already seeing that this spread into other diseases like measles, like flu. So it's really wildfire. As part of RCC, infodemic management prevents, detects, and addresses misinformation and rumors, and help to link people to high-quality information and services. But it's not built overnight. We need a systemic approach with all stakeholders coming together. We need the authorities, the international organization, the civil society, the media, the fact-checkers, the academia working together. We at WHO Europe are establishing, as we speak, APRA, which is the first European alliance for infodemic preparedness and response. So we would be delighted to work with the government of Romania, with other countries here represented, with our partners, including EFDRR, on this important issue. The second element is the coordination, which is the essential link. The response to health emergencies like COVID-19, but before that Ebola and Zika, was not limited to the health sector. It is spread to other sectors and other areas and other levels. And this is, of course, even more evident in humanitarian emergencies. When different parts of the government and the civil society give out information in an uncoordinated way, this adds to the noise and the confusion which is typical of an emergency, damages trust, and decreases the likelihood that people will accept and uptake protective measures. Communication coordination is central to emergencies of any type. Most countries already have coordination systems in place, like RCC working groups, and we need to ensure, response leaders need to ensure that these systems are up and running in peacetime, before an emergency hit, and then they are activated as we have an emergency, so that all sectors and all levels of administration have a coordinated voice. And we should expand it to other stakeholders, including the civil society. This will improve not only consistency, but will increase the credibility of the response. And the third element is capacity building, which is the way forward. Overall, countries in the European region have reported risk communication as one of their weakest capacity. They have invested a lot, we have invested a lot before COVID and after COVID. We are continuing to do that. But we need to understand that the current capacities very often are repurposed from other areas, related areas, like for instance, external communication or health promotion. They are not specific to risk communication, community engagement, and infodemic management. And they are based on funding, which are emergency funding, and which very soon will expire in many countries. So what we need is a collective, huge leap forward. We need the best prepared countries are those that embed RCC in the emergency cycle, undertake planning with the whole of government and whole of society approach, and allocate adequate, sustainable resources to RCC. And then they bring to life this preparedness for when the next emergency hit. For example, establishing social listening mechanism to understand the community barriers to health and protection, increasing literacy on imminent risks to enable people to make informed decisions when the next risk arises, or identifying trusted community influencers to support rapid engagement of at-risk groups. So investing in RCC intervention will ensure that the world is better protected against the dire human and economic cost of emergency, and it's an investment that makes economic sense and meets the commitment of the international health regulation and development goals. I'm going very quickly here because I think we have short time, but I think there are 4 main steps that implementation and preparedness of RCC in the COVID-19 era involves. One is commitment to RCC at the highest political level, and this is what this room and this conference is demonstrating. Learning lesson, there are so many lessons that we need to learn together. And then we need to analyze, every country needs to analyze their own lessons because every country has experienced a different COVID response. And every lesson is very specific, and we need to be there to collect all these lessons and learn and act on them. Drawing a roadmap, every country should bring together every stakeholder to develop a roadmap based on the gaps to build the capacities of that specific country and developing a plan that is developed, that is tested, and is adopted to make sure that basically the national plans are included in it. In this, we are ready to work with all governments, and we are ready to work with all partners. I will conclude by saying that during an emergency, mitigating the consequences and accelerating recoveries is always a top priority. However, each emergency is also an opportunity to learn and improve, and our challenge now is to act on the lesson we learned. In this room, we are uniquely positioned to protect our citizens from the next emergency. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we've heard really about the importance of community engagement and working directly with the community to build trust, not only in time of crisis, but also ahead of crisis. I will now give the floor to Adrian Tudose, who is the Director of the Strategic Analysis and Cooperation Department at the Euro-Atlantic Center for Resilience.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, thank you, Fanny, for your kind introduction. First of all, I would like to mention that the views I'm going to express today are my own, and they represent my own perspective about how the pandemic developed in Romania and how the vaccination campaign was conducted. And therefore, they cannot be linked to those of the Euro-Atlantic Resilience Center, where I'm currently working, nor with those of the Ministry of Internal Affairs from where I was seconded to the center. So having said that, I would like to start by mentioning Hugo Mercier's book, Not Born Yesterday, in which the French researchers claims that throughout our evolution as a race, we have developed some fine cognitive mechanisms that help us to evaluate communicated information. So those said mechanisms help us to accept the most beneficial messages while rejecting most harmful ones, and keep an open mind to new arguments and new pieces of evidence, which under the right circumstances can help us even to change our mind about a subject or another. So despite some popular beliefs, we as a race are not so gullible, are not so easy to impress. So one question continues to haunt me. How did we end up, at least in Romania, with over 3.3 million cases of infection with COVID, over 67,000 deaths, and why only 8 million Romanians decided to get fully vaccinated? Let me tell you, that's roughly 42%, while the threshold set for herd immunity was 70%. So, having in mind the greater domain of societal resilience, we need to ask ourselves, were the public messages sent to the population efficient? Were they formulated in a way that was understandable and relatable to the public? And were they correctly received and decoded? If so, what were the drivers that limited the efficiency of communication and facilitated hesitation to vaccinate, or even facilitated active opposition against vaccination? If not, what should we do better in the future? I don't have the answer, but whatever the correct answer is, there are a few points to be made. Not all the population eligible for vaccination had the same general level of medical knowledge in order to need how vaccines fully work, and why we had to accelerate development of vaccine during the pandemic. At this point, let me tell you that developing a vaccine is not easy to manage even in normal situation, giving some mandatory steps like funding, ethics board approvals, finding volunteer for testing, negotiating with manufacturer, and starting up scale production. According to international studies carried out in over 30 countries, including Romania, women and younger people were more reluctant to get vaccinated against COVID-19 for different reasons, such as fear of immediate and long-term effects, mistrust in the vaccine effectiveness, and the perception that younger people or people without chronic conditions would suffer a mild form in case of infection. Other interesting studies have claimed that fear of COVID-19 generated an existential anxiety, like fear of death, which in turn triggered two psychological processes. On the short term, it increases the tendency toward healthy personal choices like getting vaccinating, social distancing, and wearing a mask, but it also indirectly triggered an internal impulse to believe in conspiracy theories. Even more interesting are the conclusion of another study, namely that although at some point during the pandemic, Romania had a high mortality rate, similar to France and the Netherlands, we didn't respond by increasing the will to vaccinate like the other two countries did. So this could be explained by the low level of trust in authorities in general, in the medical system in particular, but also possibly by ineffective communication with the population. Another explanation could be linked to low literacy or interest in science. In Portugal, for example, and here I'm seeing Miguel can elaborate further, in Portugal, like I said, which had the highest vaccination rate in the European Union, people vaccinated way before they faced excess mortality, mainly because the country ranks first in the European Union in terms of people's appetite for information about scientific research and medical discoveries. Well, the general situation became more and more complex when we added in the mix promoters of disinformation, conspiracy theories, and so on and so forth. Some were driven by the quick monetization of social media traffic, by disseminating negative, alarmist, bombastic news, and others downright malicious, who knew exactly what the effect of their disinformation campaign would have. Some examples of hostile intention that I gather would be generating confusion, facilitating the formation of an anti-vaccination movement, which, after changing the narrative, was pointed to another hot topic, as we've seen immediately after the start of war in Ukraine. And we saw even the denigration, to put it mildly, of high-ranking officials that were responsible for managing the response to the pandemic. Well, I would like to also point that the narratives we observed in Romania were not specific only to our country. We also identify some of them in the eastern flank, in the Eastern European flank, with some minor local or regional particularities. As an example, we have identified narratives regarding conspiracy theories like the Great Reset, the existence of an elite and obscure group that started and will profit from the pandemic, some narratives about population control, and here they were talking about young children and elderly people, so vulnerable segments of population, health and lockdown fears, and again, targeting officials responsible for managing the pandemic crisis. In my opinion, the effect of this disinformation campaign were combined with some populist agenda and led to the transfer of this content from the virtual space to the public one. So during the pandemic, we had a series of public events organized throughout the country. One of the biggest one taking place in 29 and 30 March 2021 in Bucharest and 13 other major cities in the country. So it's important that, that in Bucharest, the demonstrator at some point turned violent during the night. And they attacked the police forces, and one member of the police forces was injured, and they destroyed public property. So what can we do? What can we do better in the future to make people understand the risk they face when they choose to disregard the authorities' advices or directions? So I would like to emphasize some steps. Messages for people who are willing to vaccinate but only need a nudge should be different than for those who are hesitant, yet open to learn more about COVID-19 vaccine. So we need to develop and to disseminate tailored messages to specific groups, because otherwise, it was said in the panel, otherwise the information will be disregarded. I will try to wrap it up. Focus on fact, not disinformation or misinformation, because when you repeat disinformation and misinformation, you are only amplifying the risk to strengthen those false claims. Another step, identify trusted messengers to increase overall credibility of the campaign, because different audiences have different public figures that they trust, and they prefer different media and communication channels. And one last step would be to continue to emphasize the support for the vaccination campaign and promote trusted vaccine endorsers, especially the ones that have an organic and strong relationship both with the communities that they belong and represent, and also with the experts and scientific groups. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe just a quick follow-up question. You said we should focus on facts because otherwise we can amplify the misinformation. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that point?
Well, the thing is that the population at some point, it's not only rational. They tend to respond better to emotion, but we need to understand that in our message, we should start from the facts and present the facts in an open manner, in a transparent manner, and then go to emotion by using some other vectors. I mean, the state, I don't think the state could send a message, an emotional message. The state should focus on the facts, but we should complement our information strategy with other persons, with other public figures. I mean, we've seen abroad that some other countries went and asked for help from football players, from singers, and they related better to they were more relatable to the audiences.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Miguel de Arriaga, the head of Division of Literacy, Health and Wellbeing in the Portuguese Directorate General for Health. He's a member of the National Task Force for COVID-19 and member of the National Behavioral Insight Task Force for COVID-19. He's also a specialist in psychological intervention for crisis and emergency event and in crisis risk communication.
Thank you so much. Is it working? Yes? No? Probably no. No? Okay. Thank you very much. So, no, not yet. I think not the problem is not. Yes. Thank you. Now it's working. Thank you so much again. Allow me to send my regards to our State Secretary, and thank you all the colleagues also in EFDRR for the opportunity to be here and to present some of the ideas and some of the experiences of the Portuguese Ministry of Health and also from the different stakeholders. One of those, our National Authority for Civil Protection, which we work together a lot. And let me start to give you some of the examples and some of our experience that I would like to highlight, not only for the COVID-19 pandemics, but also to some of the different events and disaster managers that we usually need to do, specifically during the summertime, for example, with heat waves that are more common over time in all our countries, even for those who are not used to it. Now it's becoming a more regular event for every one of us. And for example, for that case, we know that morbidity and mortality increases in a tremendous way when you're talking about heat waves, especially when they last for 3, 4, 5, 6 days in a row. But let me start from the beginning. And I was here in the colleague from Romania, and let me tell you that in Portugal, we were able to get vaccinated for the scheduled vaccinated population. The adult population, 98% of them were vaccinated. And 99% of those over 65-year-old had the boost dose also get it. So we have high rates of COVID-19 vaccine, but that comes also along with something that is extremely important for us. We have a national vaccination program, and until the 18 years old of age, we have 99% coverage. So to be vaccinated in Portugal is something where people do trust, because people trust in institutions, trust on health professionals, and this is something really, really important for us. But this doesn't appear by chance. It gives a lot of work. And I can tell you some of the ideas and some of the things that we highlighted and that we produced during the pandemic, but that we took also for over time. Most of them were already mentioned, but let me tell you how, from the things of the colleague from WHO said, how did we try to put them into practice? Because when we all write our perfect documents, we write all the main ideas, but we stick to the main topics or to beautiful sentences, like community engagement. That sounds perfect, okay, that sounds really good, but how do we put that into practice? How can we make it be successful? And unfortunately, it's not an easy task. It's something that gives a lot of work, and I can try to share with you some of the ideas that we promote. The first one was during the pandemic, we immediately in December 2019, January 2020, we immediately activated our health literacy and behavior insights team. So we work a lot with the academia, and we developed something that we called health literacy intelligence mechanism. So that could allow us to evaluate the population risk perception to social media and also to some different tools that we used. So we knew what were people facing, what were the needs that they were having. Because usually I bring a picture that I was not able to bring today, I'm so sorry. But usually we try to give people the things that we need, that they need. But in fact, some of times, I would say most of times, we are not correct. And so these kind of tools allow us to provide people the information that they really need. And we started from the beginning. For example, the use of masks. For us in Eastern Europe was not something very usual. So we had to teach people how to use masks, because some of the people were using like this, some other ones like that. In the beginning, people were using the mask. If we touch it in such a small place, everyone will throw the mask away. Now we see people with masks on the pockets, probably some of us, and we use it several times. And all of the things that we knew that we shouldn't do it, we started to do it again in a different way with different perspective, and that's behavior. And this is something, it's probably the most important item for all of the conversation, and we talk about risk communication or crisis communication. But in Portugal, we divided our intervention in 4 major axes. The first one was health literacy and behavior insights, good practices. So the things that we knew that worked, we tried to use them as much as possible. Then the health literacy intelligence, this program that I told you, which was trying to pick up the information of the population. And from that, we produce a weekly report for the decision makers, not only saying about the risk perception of the population, which was, it was public, this graphic, so the risk perception, the evaluation was from public knowledge, people knew what we were saying, but we produced a report with some recommendations for the decision makers to put it into practice. Then, of course, communication and community engagement. And for all of these four axes, we develop different aspects and different interventions. For example, for communication, we try to communicate custom-made communication, because we knew during all the pandemics that the groups of the population were different. But we needed to previously evaluate the needs of the population and who were those groups. For example, we knew that the youngsters were really behaving well inside of schools, but we also knew that outside of schools, things were not running as we would like them to be. And the evolution itself of the pandemics, it also gave us the need or the opportunity to be talking about, first of all, the physical distance, the use of masks, testing, and then vaccination. And we needed to adjust our communication over time and facing people needs and using the different actors that people were needing. And for community engagement, we developed something different. We are working now evaluating this program with WHO, and we call it a micro-influencer approach. So we not only use the influencers as we know them themselves, so important people from football, from television, but we pick up people from the communities. We pick up people from the fire brigades, from the municipalities, from the social services, and we train them to share information about the pandemics and how to communicate with their population. We train more than 5,000 people, because we know when we are communicating in a digital platform, when we are communicating on television, we leave people behind. And this was for us the only way to try to tackle as much as possible, not to leave anyone behind. And this is a huge challenge, but we tried and we did it together with civil protection and with different stakeholders. We try and we managed to get 5,000 people and to train those 5,000 people that were working in their own communities providing information. We trained them about the pandemics and we trained them about communication. And this is, I would say, like a trigger point, because to communicate well, it's a very, very important aspect in this stage. And since the pandemic was evolving, we knew that people, especially when we talk about vaccines, and before we start our vaccination campaign, we developed a study, a population study, to try to understand who were the people that were more hesitant to be vaccinated. So we tried to see what were the barriers and the predictors to get vaccinated. And we knew who was the frame of the population more hesitant, so we could focus our communication to that frame of the population. So one-size-fits-all communication, it doesn't work. It doesn't work, even when we are talking about public health and when we are talking about disaster management. So since we are getting with a lack of time, I would just like to tell you about two aspects that I believe that are really important. The first of all is that we all learned a lot how to communicate uncertainty. And that was one of our bigger challenges. Because what was real today, the next day was different, and then the other day was already new and more information. So to explain people and to provide them that information is absolutely decisive. It's something that we really need to do. And then we had different challenges, and allow me just to tell that. And the challenge for us, I would say, it's not only misinformation or disinformation. It's something that I call expert versus expert. When we had on television, for example, two medical doctors, one saying, okay, vaccinations are really good, and the other one saying, I have questions about it. So in who do people trust when they have two different experts? And here communication comes along as the most important topic, because they usually trust in the one that speaks better and that communicates better. And so that's why we need, in all our services, in all our different institutions, to be and to occupy the communicational space. And that's something really, really, really important. And then just to finish it, I would say that we need to move from the identified lessons to specific learned lessons and to use those same lessons in our daily life. And just to end it, to give you some of the ideas, what we do. So we have to move only from the part of the communicate and the technical part to move to the field. And for example, during heat waves in Portugal, we work a lot with civil protection, as I told you, and with social security. And for example, when the people who are going to the houses of the elderly, provide them food and all the needed care, they will not leave their house without asking them to drink one glass of water when they come, and then before they leave, another glass of water, providing them 6 different glasses or a bottle of water who is close to them, so they can easily drink the 1.5 or 2 liters of water that is needed to prevent mortality and morbidity during a heat wave. And this is for us to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And this is the challenge that we need to conquer, to provide the best information, but to make that same information and the behavior the easy choice for everyone. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. We really heard about the importance of trusted messengers, and it's really interesting experiences from Portugal on training micro-influencers to build trust in the communities. I would like to give the floor to Lisa Robinson, who is the head of advisory and policy at BBC Media Action. She advises on creative media and communication strategies to influence change at scale, and we will hear how media can play a role in this process.
I can see you better from here, so I'm breaking the pattern here. And as Fanny said, I work for BBC Media Action, and that's the international development charity of the BBC. That means I'm not a journalist. Some of you will be relieved. Some of you will be disappointed. But I work very much with strategic communication and thinking about how media and communication influence social and behavior change. I first of all want to thank you and DRR for being exemplary leaders in this whole field of risk communication and specifically positioning media as a stakeholder within that process. I think they've done an amazing job. We heard a really articulate presentation from Mamim Sutori this morning. And I'm really excited that we've come together to talk about it this week. Like Christiana said, we've been hoping that the dialogue will get to this point for many years now, and I think we're finally getting there. And I'm especially excited because we're doing it in a country that has an early warning alert system for bears, is that right? To prevent bear attacks? I mean, that's cool. I don't think that we don't have that everywhere. So it's a lot of excellent things happening this week. I'm going to start with a story from the Peruvian Andes, where there's a massive lake poised very dangerously above a town that it could flood any second now. And scientists worked really hard to try to install some early warning equipment to monitor the lake and be able to warn the community ahead of a flood. After lots of jumping through hoops, they finally did get it installed. And you might be thinking that that is the point when risk communication needs to start. They need to get their alert system up, think about the messages, and make sure that they reach everybody, and that's important. You might also be a few steps ahead and think, no, risk communication needs to think about the behavioral influences that would indicate whether people responded to those messages or not. And you might be thinking about a more clever campaign to really push the right buttons to get people to respond to those alerts when they happen. And that's important. In real life, none of that actually happened because when the equipment was installed, it coincided with some really dangerous or damaging weather that the residents attributed to the equipment. So the residents thought the equipment was controlling the weather, so they went up and smashed it to pieces. So it was ruined. The oversimplistic explanation is that it was superstition. It was just silly villagers who didn't know what they were doing. A more complete and accurate description is that it was a combination of lack of trust, lack of scientific understanding, jealousy over who got the contract to build the equipment in the first place, and accusations of manipulation at the governance level. So that story really illustrates just how complex communication is around risk overall, and just how important it is to integrate it throughout the whole process of disaster risk reduction. I think we're all at this event because we already believe in the critical role that risk communication plays. So I'm going to talk about how to make sure that we get it right. I'm going to talk about 3 common mistakes and how to avoid them. So mistake number 1 is assume that information leads to action. I think we'll hear a lot about this week, so I'll try to go quickly. But just to illustrate, a very quick poll, if you'll humor me. How many of you slept with a grab bag for earthquakes next to your bed last night? Anyone, be honest. One blue hand in the back. Wow, I even expected a little bit more than that. Okay, your emergency experts were in a seismic area. There was a devastating earthquake recently. That's advice that we keep telling the ordinary public to follow, yet we experts are perhaps not following information that we know is advisable. So we humans are very complex, right? We don't always respond or do things that are rational or logical. We live in very complex environments as well, with influences, social, political, cultural influences that will determine what we do and what we don't. I think it's also worth acknowledging that trust and action for disaster risk reduction can go both ways. So high trust in government might mean that people follow instructions properly. It can also lead to complacency. So if they really trust that the government will take care of things, perhaps they'll do less for themselves. The opposite can happen as well. Low trust in governments might also lead to complacency, thinking, well, it's all going to go wrong anyway because the systems aren't in place. Or it might galvanize people to take steps and take care of themselves. So it's very complex. People and the circumstances around are complex. So tip number one is to understand and plan. So understand people and the context in which they're living, and plan by having bespoke strategies based on research insights for each of those contexts. So the idea is that there's no recipe, there's no one single advice. We have lots of good indications from research, but we have to make sure not to just apply that blanket to any population. We also need, in that bespoke strategy, a very clear, what we might call a theory of change, or very clear objectives, very precise objectives. If your objective is raise awareness, I would advise you need to go back and rethink that. People are usually pretty aware that they're living on an earthquake zone, in an earthquake zone. People are aware that there's something out there called COVID. What they might not be aware of is what they can do about it. It might not even be awareness. It might be about confidence, being courageous to do something different in your society, being a little bit less complacent. So you really need to dig deep and understand audiences to come up with something that's quite practical and applicable and that really will make a difference. Just to say, the government of Nepal has been a real leader in this area as well. They commissioned research, audience research, at a very detailed level across the whole country, and compared risk perceptions with real hazards, how they could access meeting communication, who trusted influencers were, and came up with a plan that they could then use to develop some very specific communication across the country. Mistake number two, avoid conversation. What I mean by that is avoid conversation in multiple directions. So this idea of two-way communication, we hear a lot, right? We advise against one-way communication, is where you just push messages out to the public. There's a role for that. We then counter that by saying, well, then if that's not good enough, let's do two-way communication, where we listen to people as well. The thing with that is it implies that there are only two stakeholders in disaster risk communication, us and them. And that's a very simplistic approach. I think it's much more effective to think of all of society communicating in their natural ways with the people that they normally engage with. So what we want to see is that happens in a much more informed way. So we might be thinking about two levels here of conversation. The conversation between the public and the officials. So this idea of governance and accountability is vital, and trust building happens by building integrity. Integrity is built by doing things that are difficult, right? So it's when you do the right thing rather than the easy thing. So by engaging with the public, you'll be able to build that integrity and trust. Then we want to see more conversation amongst the communities themselves in a really informed way. There's been a lot of discussion about mis and disinformation today, so I'm going to jump over this quite quickly, and because Adam is giving me the signal that I've got to wrap up. I think just to flag that when there is a gap in information, people will fill it with something, with you, experts, or without you. So that's an incentive, I should think, to be able to get out there and really try to engage as best you can with those. So tip number 2, I know that's really scary sometimes, especially if you've got a media environment that is maybe not as conducive or as patient to some of that expertise as you want. Tip number 2 is to build that healthy communications environment. And what I mean by that is, at the population level, build risk literacy, build digital and media literacy so that publics are much more perceptive of what is false and misleading information, to not spread it themselves, and to call people out who are spreading that mis and disinformation. At a practitioner level, we want to see much higher skills, right? We want to see, amongst media practitioners, people who do follow really solid editorial guidelines, and we want technical experts who can speak with skill and clarity when they need to. At an institutional level, we also have to think about the regulation in the environment that encourages public service media, as opposed to some commercial-driven media, which is, for example, driven by algorithms which reward emotional responses rather than factional ones. The last one is short, and mistake number 3 is to be boring. We're talking about some things that are either really scary and difficult or just dull, right? I mean, how thick is the plywood has to be, or insurance policies. This is really tough. And we're asking people to stop whatever they're doing in their very busy lives, to think about something that's really complex, and then to spend time and money on something that might or might not happen. That's really tough. So we've got to match that with what people really care about, and that's usually family, friends, money. So the idea that we can just show up into a community and start talking about some very, dull, difficult things, let's meet people where they are. Let's talk about family, friends, money, in relation to risk, because I think that's much easier to get to them with. So tip number 3 to close is to build your dream team. And what I mean by that is to build your multi-stakeholder communication dream team. And that, I think you can imagine, comprises of government officials, scientists, technical experts, media people, creative people, young people, community outreach workers, all of these people together with the right skills, with the right intentions, with the right relationships can come up with much more effective communication efforts that make those conversations happen across society than any one of us could do on our own. The media are not experts on disaster risk reduction. They don't work for the government. Technical scientists usually aren't natural communicators either. So I would say, let's go out, let's do this together. We'll do much better communication together, and it might even be a little bit of fun. Done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've heard about the importance of building media and digital literacy, and Minna Armanen, who is a senior advisor on education at the Finnish National Agency for Education, will tell us more about this and the experience in Finland. She's currently specializing on issues of language education, media education, and support in current multi-disruption situations.
Thank you. Does it work? No? Yes. Yes. Thank you for inviting me to join this dialogue, and dear participants and listeners. Maybe I come here about a little bit different angle or different point of view next. I'll give you some viewpoints how we in Finland have supported societal resilience in education when preparing core curriculum and implementing the core curriculum. So my viewpoint is a little bit different from these large risk organizations and thinking. But the main issue is with our work with the curriculum is cooperation with different parts, and it's very important, and we stress that a lot. We do not make curriculum alone in our offices, but in cooperation with teachers and researchers, and it's very important for us. So last years has really challenged also Finnish society. Our society has been fairly coherent society for a long time, but these changing situations nowadays are changing also our situation. And we see the education is very important in this occasion. And we have been talking here a lot about trust already, but we in Finland, we see that the key concepts for making better future, the faith of future, are trust and preparedness for changing situations. There is no societal resilience without a trust to society, and we feel that in Finland we have succeeded in that a lot. We mainly trust in our authorities, in education and political decisions. And this trust, I think, has been created long before there has been any disruption. And it's important that in the normal life and the normal way of living can support this risk analysis and risk situations. And the normal processes are very important also to keep on in the situations like we are facing now. Next, I'll focus to some viewpoints connected to our core curriculum mainly for primary and lower secondary education, because that's our basic education, comprehensive education, which is for all the age groups from the age 7 to 15. And we have particularly seen last years the importance of media literacy, media education, and it's increased vastly the need for that. And as we speak here about risks in changing situations, we see clearly that media literacy is one of the most important tools that helps us navigate in this current digital and information-rich world. And we have to create new means and new measures to combat against hate speech, dis and misinformation, and learn to read critically and culturally aware in order to build our own perspectives based on evidence, and also these perspectives are affecting our identities, and the identity politics is very important too. And also this media literacy promotes highly the democracy in society and the participation in society. Now, first I'll concentrate a little bit in this long-term measures. So when you are doing or you are designing the core curriculum, in Finland we have then local curriculum made by local schools and educator providers. So this long process is very important when we are hearing researchers and teachers, and in working groups there are different kind of people making the curriculum. And we last renewed our curriculum for basic education in 2014, and it was taken in use 2016. But we still see that it's very up to date, and it's very flexible tool also in these current situations. And there are some features in our curriculum I would like to stress here. Firstly, we saw that the improving of school culture is very important. And we described in our curriculum the school culture and some features of it. For example, participation and the good values the school should have. And also one thing connected to this risk information is that the learning or the teaching should be language aware teaching. So that means that the language of schooling and the language of the school, this academic language and the language of different subjects is very important. And it's not only the language teachers who are responsible for this language-aware teaching, but all teachers in all subjects. And also the second one I point out here, that we introduced transversal competencies, so shared competencies, key competencies, which are connected to each subjects. And there we have this media literacy, very in many different competencies, and we designed a little bit new concept of this competence called multiliteracy. And this multiliteracy competence, it includes media literacy, but also a different kind of literacies needed in different subjects, like in mathematical literacy or health literacy, and so on. So we think this new concept is connecting different kind of literacies, very key factor in every subject, and it's very important. Also in other competencies like critical thinking skills and ICT or digital competence is very connected to media literacy. So these things are very, very long-term. These are these documents, you said, but still it's important how you implement the curriculum. And there is many ways to implement the curriculum. First, in Finland, we do this local curricula, and it needs very much cooperation with different teachers and principals, and very much discussion and making a shared view on curriculum. And it takes a little bit time. But also we do some support material for teachers when implementing the curriculum by our agency. But also it's not only what we are making, but then we have different kind of organizations which are making more closely material for teachers for different subjects. And I also stress out that it's important for teachers which have had their own education in different times to have some in-service training alongside when the new curricula is implemented. And some points also from this current situation. We have made in our agency a lot of information, mainly for schools, for school management during this COVID-19 time and this Russia's attack on Ukrainian. And I think it's a bit a different role for us now to be like in cooperation with ministry or health organizations and so on. But still we have made a very successful cooperation with the different parts. And we certainly have to reflect and think what we have learned from the COVID pandemic and what is the well-being loss or learning loss after that, and try to do our best to combat that. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And to conclude this panel, we will now hear from Anna Saban-Sevaite from the UN Major Group for Children and Youth, and she's the Europe Regional Focal Point for Disaster Risk Reduction. And she's currently a climate ecology and risk educator in Lithuania.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here, to sit in front of you and to represent children and youth constituency within the UN system, UN stakeholder engagement mechanism. And I particularly particularly represent the disaster risk reduction cluster. So basically, we are a network of young advocates and activists working on implementation of the Sendai framework, and I'm the European regional focal point, and my role is to disseminate information and communicate effectively. So basically, when the time comes that we can all mobilize and, for example, have regional consultations leading to the global platform where we have hundreds of youth activists implementing Sendai framework, feeding in their lessons learned to develop policy priorities that we can take to the global platform, that we can take to the Sendai midterm review. So as a person whose role is to share information, communicate towards effective action, I obviously have a lot to say on the topic of communication and information sharing, but as a trusted messenger of the network, I'm gonna try to model my intervention according to the principles of what effective communication should look like. So it should be targeted, so I'm considering that there are a lot of decision makers in the room. It should be consolidated and brief to the point, right? It should be backed up by relevant data, and it should come from the heart. Because honestly, the true and most effective messaging is the one that is not afraid to be a little personal, right? That takes the mask off from all of the science and everything and just brings it heart to heart. We're human beings, we're here for the right reasons and for the same goals. So basically, I'm gonna try to address a little bit this, of this paradigm of disinformation and trust that we're seeing within the European countries and Central Asian countries right now, and the problematic it arises. And then I'm going to be responding a little bit to what is effective communication and especially community engagement in trying to communicate risk, but we are trying to communicate towards action, right, towards behavioral change. So to begin with, we have a phenomenon of disinformation rising in the European Union. We have, over the last year, we had 41% more of media alerts for disinformation. And disinformation takes root when trust leaves the room, right? And trust is leaving the room. Because the truth is that the highest number statistically of trust that right now Europeans show towards public broadcasting media sources is 49%, right? 49, it's less than half of Europe trusts public media sources. And that is really concerning. And the number is even lower with the youth. Because youth don't really go to the public media broadcasting sources and channels so much. They have social media, they go and seek out information that's relevant to them via other channels, YouTube, TikTok, and everything like that. And maybe rightly so, because as a colleague educator from Finland has mentioned, right, youth has media literacy programs. We're implementing them in Lithuania as well. And they can see through covert propaganda as well. I mean, youth can recognize that a lot of public broadcasting media sources are pushing covert political propaganda. You know, so basically they choose not to follow them. They choose not to follow these messages. And it is true that World Press Freedom Index for 2022 showed that only 13.2% of European and Central Asian media outlets are ranked in good standing in terms of media independence and freedom. 39% are deemed problematic. And we have a drop in Central European countries, and we have a drop in Western European countries. We actually have a drop throughout Europe. Some countries are exempt, of course, but most are witnessing a drop. So it's something concerning. I'm happy to hear that the European Union is putting some effort with the Media Freedom Act to restore this trust, to restore the independence. But if we are losing the channels via which we can effectively communicate risks, the channels that used to be very well established and reach the broad population, then we are a little bit in a pickle when it comes to how do we continue to have ongoing risk communication and how do we continue to reach the population. And I'm very happy to hear that the Romanian government and Portuguese government is seeking out different ways to reach people and communities, and it's great. And we should continue with this effort. But we also shouldn't ignore the elephant in the room, that the trust in media is suffering, right? So the messages that we are transmitting via main channels don't really resonate. So how do we restore the trust? Well, I think we just have to own up to our mistakes, admit that sometimes as governments we do make mistakes. And personally, I remember during COVID times, I was doing a traineeship in Brussels, and the European Union response at the very beginning was a little bit hectic and erratic and all over the place. And there was a moment when the President, Ursula von der Leyen, admitted it. She said mistakes were made. The response was lacking behind. There was too much bureaucracy. We are so sorry. We lost lives because we didn't respond properly. And that was a very powerful moment. I remember discussing this with my counterpart trainees, and we were saying, wow, she's a leader I can stand with because she's not afraid to admit that she made a mistake. There's nothing more powerful than when an authority figure admits that they, even though they act from the best interest, they can go wrong. And then they go, and even better, if they go, reach out to the population and ask them what they could do better. Look for ways to learn and to improve and to find new solutions, right? Maybe to see which population is not responding and to see why they're not responding and how we can target the messaging towards them. So admitting, owning up to mistakes is a powerful thing. I mean, what's happening now in Turkey, and it's really a tragedy, and we know that lives were lost as well because the building safety requirements were subpar. The people know that, right? So the people are waiting for the government to admit to it. But oftentimes it's easier to sweep it under the carpet and just carry on pretending that we didn't make a mistake. And that further harms trust. So the other point I'd like to talk to a bit is what is effective communication and community engagement. We heard it a few times. So community engagement should be based on dialogue. Basically, a lot of times we hear, we communicated the risk, we told people to vaccinate, and they didn't. Why? Well, go and ask why. This is what I also find in class with students is sometimes, you can prepare the best lesson ever and the students are not just engaging. And of course you can say, oh, they don't care. But oftentimes they have priorities differently. I remember I had a group of students who were misbehaving in class and they really couldn't focus. And I went to them and asked them, why are you being so disruptive? And they were like, well, we're really hungry. We cannot focus because we're really hungry right now. And the only priority we have is when the class is over, we're going to go and eat. So then we discuss how we can move forward in the future. I'm like, could we please maybe have some snacks before class or something, okay? But the point is that the answers are usually simpler than we think, and we can find those answers if we go and ask. So I really recommend on doing that. The other thing I wanted to promote is to take the first step to establish the culture of communication, and for us to foster the culture of communication, we have to open communication channels. We have to go out there and engage people in an ongoing discussion. It's not just interventionist approach. It's really an ongoing discussion. And EFDRR is actually doing a great job with the global Sendai stakeholder engagement mechanism, which is a multilateral platform where different stakeholders are communicating. The media constituency is represented there, the youth is represented, LGBTI are represented. We have all these different stakeholder groups in an ongoing dialogue among themselves and with the EFDRR in what they can do better, right? How they can work collectively. We also have an example of the European Office for EFDRR establishing the youth consultative platform, where they have a dialogue-based approach in discussing priorities for the priorities for the region, priorities in implementing Sendai network. So I think these are lessons that also the national governments could take home to start doing it. At first, it might take some time to pick up, but the cultural change takes some time, right? Cultural change takes some time, and we should be willing to make that change. So with this, I would like to wrap up. And I promise this was not a covert propaganda session for UNDRR promoting how well they're doing in communicating, even though I do think they are doing a great job. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you for your kind words of appreciation. We're going to move now to the question and answers. So you have the Slido information on the screen if you want to send some questions. I have now received a few, and I'll start with the first one. How do you suggest we cope with the overall information overload when we are trying to get our message campaign to reach the wider public? Any of you? Miguel?
Thank you so much. It's a very, very good question. It's a challenging one. Because when we talk about communication, first we need to get the space, and usually are not the official authorities that create the space. It's sometimes hard to send our very good ideas and our priorities to make the cover of the newspapers or to enter the media as we want to. But one of the challenges, I believe that when is it too much? And I believe that that's the real question. We had that when you talk about vaccines. If you well remember, everyone wanted a vaccine in the beginning. Then the vaccine procedures were so fast, as fast as possible, fulfilling all the requirements. But even so, we had people saying, okay, maybe it was too fast. So what's happening now? Are the vaccines secure? Are they safe to be used? And this information, we need to tackle it in a very, very sensitive way. And sometimes I believe that it's a good idea not to overload the information, because then it will be too much. And some of the things that I would like to also to mention is when we talk about these communication approaches and the different way as we do it, we need to tackle it, as we mentioned before, to specific groups, to specific populations, in order to make them, give them the answers that people really need. And those are, I believe, one of the biggest challenges that we need to conquer. And then to try as much as possible, and we also did that in Portugal, but it's a challenge, to involve the media and to use it as a stakeholder, not wanting to organize things our own way, but to have them with a specific purpose. And if during the pandemic that was something that we could do, especially in the beginning, because everyone, the community, the society was involved to give one same answer for different issues, I believe it's a little bit harder probably to get that same approach. But it's also one of the ideas, it's to involve as much stakeholders as possible.
Thank you. Christiana, did you want to add something?
Yeah. Thank you. I just wanted to add something very concrete about infodemic management. For instance, before the colleague from Portugal mentioned talking about facts. I mean, there is, for instance, one very specific technique that we use, which is called the sandwich, where basically you start with the fact, then you refer to the false information, and you close with the fact. So, but referring to the false information sometimes is not directly done, but it's basically just to, acknowledge the perception. Because if you neglect the perception, is basically dismissing completely the understanding of the people. But this sandwich technique is very effective because you basically close these between two facts. Other things which we are doing is also working, for instance, with search engines, so that the official information comes first when people search for it on the internet. And what also the government of Romania is doing, basically redirect everything to official information, putting them very high on the web. And then I think there is one thing we need all to understand, that for what we talk about misinformation and disinformation, but there is a big difference. Misinformation is linked to the cultural values of the people, to their beliefs. Disinformation is deliberate. So we need to tackle it in a different way. When it comes to misinformation, we really need to activate what we have been discussing, the social listening, so really understand what are these specific concerns and beliefs, and they're very specific. What I don't, all the time when I speak with my team, I say all the time, I don't want to hear about general public. General public doesn't exist. There's no such a thing. We have the mothers, the teachers, the children, and we need to target everything to their real specific perception, understanding them and addressing them. So, just this.
Yeah.
You allow me? Okay, thank you. I think what we heard here is excellent. We have a lot of food for thought and a lot of issues that we can take to the ministerial table tomorrow. I need still to draw the attention to two things. First, disasters that we are used to are short-term. They are not long-term. So the communication is short also. You have the communication during the disaster, which happens once you have an earthquake and something like this, and then you have shortly after that, and you have the communication before if you did it to prepare your population. The pandemic was a different thing. 2 whole years, or even 2 years and a half. And whatever we do at a certain time, our messages become boring, whether we like it or not. So at the beginning, we were interesting. It was interesting to invite Dr. Arafat to speak. It was interesting to invite Professor Churchill from the infectious disease. It was interesting to invite those people who had something to do and to say about the pandemic. But for the business media, and please, I am insisting on this, the business media wants to make money. Money is made on ratings. So when we become boring, the ratings can be boosted by bringing new people who are not boring. And what is nicer than scandals, fights in the TV studio for 3 or 4 hours, having a tailor talking about vaccines, having a singer talking about vaccines, but not saying to the people, I vaccinated myself, passing to the people the message that the authorities and everybody is lying to them, that vaccines are not right for them. And I'm not talking only about the COVID vaccines. We killed in Romania a lot of women by cancer, by destroying a campaign on HPV vaccine in 2008. The minister started a big campaign to start vaccination of girls at 14 years old. The evidence was there, everything was there. It was so hardly targeted politically and by affiliated media to certain political sites that they stopped it. Now we are talking about it again, but between 2008 and 2022, think of how many generations of girls are going to have cancer, and some of them already died. So we need to open our eyes to the situation that is around us. Yes, we need to respect all the rules of communication, the democratic rules and so on, but we are in a very harsh field, and the longer is the disaster, the harder is to communicate on long times. And the media will adapt itself on how much money it will make out of the ratings. And this is why we need to find, and I agree here, that the mainstream media is not the only way we should be using. And in Romania, I'm sorry, the fake news and the disinformation was not only on social media. we had part of it spread on mainstream media in main time shows at 9 o'clock in the night, 10 o'clock in the night, 11 o'clock in the night, every day, every day, every day. And this is how we got from being the first in vaccination in Europe in the first few weeks to become one of the last countries in vaccination in Europe. And this is how we lost in the fourth wave over 20,000 people in 2 months' time with the Delta variant, when we had in our intensive cares 90% of those admitted non-vaccinated and nearly 90% of those dying non-vaccinated. And that information was not sufficient to convince people that this is science. They are dying, only 90% mostly are not vaccinated. So what do you say about that? And we had people putting under the question mark the numbers we were giving and so on. I'm not going into this, it will take a lot of time of how they dealt with it, but it was a whole art. There were people funding this. There were people paying for this. So we go in these disasters into a big situation, a big fight with those whom we don't know. We don't know who's funding, we don't know who's behind it. We may think of it, we may believe we know, but we still need to fight this. So I wanted to say this because I think that the situation, with all the information we got, with what Finland does in education, which I think it is the key issue, we still need to look at other ways of working for the future disasters, to communicate before and how to communicate during them. Because long disasters always will create the situation we had with the COVID, whatever they are. Thank you.
Thank you. We won't have time to take all the questions, but I still have a couple of questions on communicating uncertainty and how do we communicate about what we don't know? How do we address uncertainty? And we heard that if we don't say anything, others will fill the gap. So how do we address uncertainty? Any? Yes. Yeah?
You have a mic there? No, there's this.
Okay, so I can move on, yeah, thank you. I believe that to communicate uncertainty was probably the biggest challenge that we had. And then I believe that one of the key words would be to say all the time what we really know. But also, and at the same time, it was something that we need to speak all at the one same voice, the technical part and the political part, saying what we know, not being afraid to say, for example, okay, we had to lock down everything, now we will release it, but if the number of cases increase, probably we will need to go back again. In saying this, it will tell people that we are doing our best, we are trying as much as we can, but we don't know. But we know where we want to reach, but we still don't know the exact way to fulfill that gap. And also one important thing that I would like to highlight, we're talking a little about the emotional part of answering and of the behaviors, but just to let you know something that we know, that the evidence tells us that it's not correct to provide fear, because to promote fear is not even sustainable on behavior change. We know that when it appears, for example, we all saw it in the beginning of the pandemic, the number of cases specifically for us in Italy and then afterwards in Spain, everyone was really scared and afraid. But we know that fear, it's not sustainable over time. And we can tell, for example, like with the use of masks, the people wanting to go out of their houses, returning to their daily lives as much as possible. So this is something that I would like also to focus heading on the uncertainty question. Thank you.
Thank you. So, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge the fact that uncertainty is the status quo. Is that there's never a moment in time, I think, when we're absolutely certain. Because we cannot foresee how actions right now are what long-term consequences are going to have. We can try to model, we can try to have predictions, and I agree here, right? We can say, okay, based on these facts, this is probably the best course of action that we can take as a government right now, as decision makers, as society, and this is the course of action we recommend. But I think we should always keep the channel then open for feedback from the society, feedback from the communities. And actually a channel should be open for this communication and consultation, saying this is the course of action we would like to take right now, and we are also here ready to take your views on this. You know, because maybe the community is going to respond, no, actually for our specific community, we don't think that this is a course of action we'd like to take, and we should respect that. We should see where this dialogue is going to take us, and maybe it is going to open up a different course of action. So going back is this culture of communication and dialogue that we should foster. And this is the best way to manage uncertainty, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe I can add a little bit from the perspective of education and teachers, and this uncertainty is really what teachers don't want to be, or that they mainly think that they had to know everything. But now the role of the teacher has been changing also. And it's a very good point here to discuss and say that teachers don't know everything. So it's very important also for them. And it creates great opportunities for discussions with children and within classes. So the openness, I think it's and admitting that we don't know everything, it's very important.
Thank you, and I will be brief. I want to bring it a step forward. Basically, in any emergency, as you know, the citizens, the media, they don't like the grays. They want the black and they want the white. So we don't need only to acknowledge the uncertainty. We need to shout the uncertainty. We need to repeat and repeat and repeat. How do we do that? Let's not make any final statement until it's final, until it's conclusive. Say all the time, based on the evidence we have so far, we can say, but it can change. And when it changes, we will let you know. I mean, in a situation like COVID, it's normal that science changes and we have to adapt our recommendation. What is not normal is that we are criticized for doing so. So it means that we haven't really managed to communicate this uncertainty. We need to set the expectation of people that science and the situation is going to change. We need to tell them that is changing. It will be, to go to the point to say that it's very likely that what I'm saying now will change tomorrow. But this doesn't mean that I'm inconsistent. It means that the science evolves, and thus my recommendation is to evolve. So all the time say, based on what we know at this stage, based on at this point in time, but it can change. So it's very important to keep the door open all the time without final statement until they're really final.
I want just to add to this, because this is exactly what I do when I have certain situations going out on press conferences. This is what we know now. The situation is in dynamic, it is moving. New information may come out to correct what I said. And this usually, especially when we are talking about major incidents, accidents, things like this, where we go out, we have to go out at a high level, we always say, this is what we have so far, things may change. Even when we go on phone and so on, it doesn't have to be a press conference. But I think that we need to insist that we are not 100% certain yet, and that we will come with more information further.
Thank you very much, and I think we will now conclude this panel because we are running out of time to take further questions. I will summarize some of the key points that emerged from this discussion today. I think the first message is don't shy away from conversations about risk. They don't create panic, they don't create fear, but they help in building trust. And these conversations have to be ongoing. They don't start when the crisis happens. It's an ongoing dialogue, it's ongoing communication that help build trust over time. And we heard from Portugal, for instance, how the successful vaccination program built on an existing successful vaccination program and a high level of trust in the health authorities. Another message I would like to highlight is a basic message when it comes to communications is know your audience. Humans are complex, and if there are some insights from behavioral science that we heard today, is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. We really need to tailor our messages to meet people where they are, and we need to understand our communities. Social listening is an important tool to do that. And it's also dynamic because risk perception change over time. So it's important to stay attuned with our audience, to tailor our message and meet people where they are with their current understanding of the risks. Community engagement is really a topic that also is at the heart of building trust. We heard from the World Health Organization how it can be embedded in emergency response, and it's really at the core of health interventions. We heard about initiatives from Romania with the caravans going into rural areas to raise awareness and to conduct direct outreach with population that may not be so connected digitally. We also heard of door-to-door initiatives in Portugal for heat wave. I will also mention a UNDR campaign called Get to High Ground, where we encourage vulnerable coastal communities to organize runs, fun runs alongside their evacuation routes. So these are initiatives that can happen to engage with communities all year long. We also heard about the importance of trusted messengers and influencers and finding other messengers to complement the more institutional communications. And we heard from Portugal about micro influencers, community leaders who can also help amplify messages in their own communities and can build on the trust they already have within their communities. We also heard about the importance of capacity building, and capacity building at all levels, whether it's these community leaders, but experts who can get media training to better communicate and enhance their credibility and the trust from the public. We also heard that fighting the infodemic is really an emerging skill, and this is an important topic we need to invest in further capacity building. And we heard from Finland about media literacy programs and how to embed them in school curriculums. I would also like to take this opportunity to mention a UNDR program called Media Saving Lives, where we work with media as a stakeholder and help train media in the global south to enhance their capacity to alert, inform, and educate. And we are also encouraging the establishment of task force, informal or formal, between media organizations, broadcasting unions, and national disaster risk management agencies and med services to bring these together. And this brings me maybe to the last point, which is we really need an all-of-society approach to underpin risk communication. So it's about conducting a dialogue and bringing together all the actors so that when the crisis strikes, we can speak and communicate with one coherent voice. And that means engaging again with the media as a stakeholder, emergency services, public institutions, schools, youth, technical providers we heard, like search engine. It's really an effort that needs to go across all of society. Thank you. So we will conclude now, and I think we'll resume at 2:15.
Yes, and lunch is served now. Thank you.
Thank you.